Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Amin here and I am so excited to be back on YouTube and uploading regular videos. I took a little bit of a break in between. If you've been on my channel before, if you haven't, welcome. But I am back to posting regular content, hopefully once a week. Today's video is very exciting for me personally. So some of you may already know if you've been here before, but I am now a genetic counselor. I started making videos when I was still in graduate school to become a genetic counselor. I graduated this May and then I started working full-time pretty much right after. And so I thought it would be a good idea for me to do a Q&A now that I have been working in the field for a few months and now that I have officially become certified. So once you graduate from your master's program, you have the opportunity to write a certification board exam. It's not required, but it is a good thing to do in terms of your career and potentially getting a higher salary and being able to work. Some states in the US have licensure, so you need to be certified in order to work in those states. But I currently work in Canada. I work in Toronto. I went to school in New York. If you're interested in kind of my journey, I'll link all of my genetic counseling videos in the description box below and I'll pop some up on the screen as well. So I would really recommend that if you have heard of genetic counseling for the first time, make sure you watch those videos to have a background knowledge of what the career is and what the prerequisites are in order to apply to graduate school. But today I thought I would answer some questions about actually being a genetic counselor. And so over on my Instagram, which is also just Amin Overshares, I asked my followers to send me some questions of things that they wanted to know now that I've been working for a few months. And so today is September 12th. I started working on June 1st and I wrote my board exam maybe like 3 weeks ago. It's usually done in August. I wrote the American exam this year and I may be writing the Canadian one next year, depending on how I feel about it. So let's just jump into the questions. So the first question we can answer is, how difficult was it to find a job in Canada? I'm sure a lot of people have this question, especially if you are Canadian. It was hard, I will tell you that. Of everyone that I know that is working in Canada right now and just graduated out of school, they're working a contract position. Of course, things can change, so it's not guaranteed that everyone who gets a job in Canada is working contract right away. But for the most part, I've seen that a lot of people are working a maternity leave or they're working like a 6-month contract type of thing. And the reason for that is because jobs are quite limited in Canada. And I can only speak for Ontario really because that's only where I applied. I'm originally from Ontario, from the Toronto area. And so I only applied to jobs here. But in general, it was really hard. As you can imagine, every Canadian student that's in a Canadian program, as well as the ones that went to programs in the States, most likely want to come back home. So there was a lot of competition for these jobs and also knowing that they're not permanent jobs. And so it was hard to come back home. I was lucky enough and surprised enough to be able to come home right away. And I think where I ended up is definitely a great fit for me. I did a lot of interviews, if I'm being completely honest. I applied to a lot of jobs in Canada and in the States. I guess I want to say I was pretty strict on the locations that I wanted to work at and live at because all of my friends and family are at home. So I wanted to make sure I was close to home and also somewhere where I would kind of enjoy living. So that limited it to like a few cities. And I applied to a lot of jobs, like maybe 15 jobs, and I had a lot of interviews. At the end of it, I had a couple of different options. And of course, when I was given the opportunity to come home, I would take it. So I would say that it's not impossible to come home after graduating, but it's definitely a harder route to take. But if you were given the opportunity, of course, and that's what you want to do, of course, go for it. But a lot of people do end up working in the States for a couple of years, and then once they have that experience and they're considered a more competitive applicant, then they would apply for jobs here. And we'll see how the permanent side of things go. Of course, it's all very dependent on funding since we are under a different healthcare system. So that was a very long answer to this question, but It's hard if you put your mind to it. Of course, it's possible, but if you see a job that you're interested in applying to, it doesn't matter how far out of reach it seems, I would just recommend that you apply. Okay, so I had a question about work-life balance, and I think that's a great question. This is something that was really important to me when I was even applying to be a genetic counselor. That's something that really drew me to the field, but then also was really important when I was looking for the right job. I have a lot of hobbies clearly outside of work, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough time for that, but also I don't want to hate my job. I don't want to hate going to work. I don't want to like dread every single weekday. That's not what I wanted for my life, and that's not what I wanted as a genetic counselor. And so for my job in particular, the culture at my workplace is very pro work-life balance. And so this is not the same at every single location that you work at, or every single hospital or lab or wherever you work. It is very variable, of course, but at my job, I will say we do have a lot of work-life balance. Everyone always takes their lunch breaks, usually the full hour. We go on walks during lunches. Everyone, for the most part, clocks in at 8:30, clocks out at 4:30. Of course, there's no actual clocking in, but we leave right when we're supposed to leave if we can. And we have other things outside of life that we like to do and that we like to talk about and that we like to do together, which I really value. And I will say that that is a pro of being a genetic counselor, because you have the opportunity to work weekdays, 40 hours a week, and then you're kind of done. Whereas with other healthcare jobs, I feel like sometimes it can seep into your life a little bit more. And of course it does seep into your life a little bit more because it is an emotionally taxing career, and I'll get into that in another question as well. But I think as of right now, I'm finding it to be quite manageable. Kind of leading into the next question, it was, what type of genetic counselor are you and how did you choose? So right now I am a prenatal genetic counselor, which means that I help individuals who are experiencing high-risk pregnancies, and sometimes I do preconception as well. So if we know there's a genetic condition running in the family, I'm kind of helping to family plan. So prenatal means for me that it is a lot of emotions. Being pregnant is a very stressful time period. It can be a very happy time period, but it can also be stressful when there are things that are unexpected. And so in my job, I do a lot of people who screen positive or screen as high risk as part of regular tests that you have during pregnancy, and talking to them, telling them the options of doing a CVS or an amniocentesis, and then if the testing comes back positive, to confirm there is a genetic diagnosis in the pregnancy, helping people decide if they want to either continue or end a pregnancy. And as you can imagine, at every single step in that conversation, it is another very difficult decision to be making. A lot of the times it is emotionally hard to support people making very difficult decisions, especially because a lot of the pregnancies are very wanted. And so it is hard. Some days I come home and I'm completely exhausted, but at the same time, I am so lucky, I think, because I really get to support and help people and families through a hard time. Prenatal in general was always something that I kind of knew where I wanted to end up. When I was an undergrad, I volunteered for a sexual assault support center, and I helped women going through a very difficult time again. And I knew that that was kind of the route that I wanted to take. And so of course in grad school, I did all of the different requirements. I did prenatal, I did cancer, I did pediatrics and all of that. And when I did prenatal, it just kind of confirmed for me that yes, this is what I want to do. I knew it was going to be hard. For me, I think it is worth it. And that kind of leads into the other question that I saw, which was unexpected work experiences as a genetic counselor that you didn't imagine encountering while in graduate school. And so at the place that I work at now, when someone has an abortion or they stop a pregnancy, there's a couple of ways to do it. When they have an induction of labor, that means that they push the baby out. And people have different reasons why they choose one procedure over the other, of course, but one of the biggest reasons why people choose an induction is because they want to spend time with the baby. And by baby, I mean fetus at this point. Like, they're still very early on in the pregnancy, and so they're not viable outside of the womb. And so people want to have pictures, they want to hold the baby, they want footprints, they want all of that. And before I started this position, I didn't know that I would be the one doing that. So for me, when I learned about it, I was like, oh, I have to touch the fetus, okay. But the more I did it, I haven't done it often, I will say, I've only done it twice. And the more I experienced it, I realized how valuable and how important it is for these families to have that time, especially for their grieving process. So during the moment, I won't say that I'm like super happy, like, oh my gosh, sign me up, I want to touch this fetus, I want to take its footprints. But I think that was something that was honestly very unexpected, and it's not a deal breaker for me. And some of you might be like, what is wrong with you, in the comments. But like, again, I think it's coming from a place of really wanting to help someone. And it's sad. The entire process is very, very sad. And of course, this may be a political opinion to you, but it has made me way more pro-choice than I was already. I always was pro-choice, but just watching people experience the pain of a loss is like a whole other level. So that's one thing that was unexpected. It is not expected of you as a genetic counselor to be doing that. Different centers have different ways that they go about it. Some centers, the genetic counselors will refer them out to a different program, to a different hospital, to a different clinic, and then you have nothing to do with it. But at the place that I work out, there is that continuity of care. So we're really with the patient from the beginning up until the end, and then even afterwards. We have special programs that we refer to in terms of support groups and doing like a special burial service for all the families who have lost pregnancies. It's a lot of extra additional support that's available, but I personally really, really value it. So if you think I am crazy, that's okay, but it's definitely not a deal breaker for me. Okay, so one more question about just being a genetic counselor is, do genetic counselors earn enough to pay off their educational debt? So this is a great question, and definitely something very important if you are considering becoming a genetic counselor. If you go to school in the States, even in Canada, there is a wide range of tuition. Some schools are much cheaper, and some schools are like, I want to say 8 times the tuition price of the cheapest school. And so when you are applying to schools, definitely take that into consideration, because at the end of the day, you will get the same degree as someone who's going to the very expensive school versus someone who's going to the very not expensive school. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other factors that come into play, such as, for me, it was really important location. I didn't want to be in the middle of nowhere. I also wanted to be close to home in a big city, all of that. It also is important in terms of, does this program make you feel like you belong here? That's really important as well. And there's all of these different things that you take into consideration. And I will say that it is manageable from my perspective, for the program that I went to, for the salary that I have, that I can pay back my debt and I can do it in a timely fashion. This is a very, very subjective question. Everyone has a different financial situation. Some people's parents can pay for their entire degree and they don't have to pay them back. Some people take loans from the government. Some people take loans from their parents. Some people have enough savings to pay for it themselves. So it really just depends on your situation. Personally, I will say that my salary is enough that I can pay back my loans in a timely fashion. I'm not going to go into details about my loan payment plans, because that's just a personal thing that I want to keep personal. But I would say, if you're concerned about it, definitely take into consideration the different tuition prices, what your financial situation is. There are plenty of resources that tell you what the average salary is of a new genetic counselor, even breaking it down by location. So I will link all of that down below. And before you reach out to anyone, just a pro tip, you can reach out to genetic counselors, reach out to genetic counseling student. I've had a lot of people email me about their questions, which is fine, but please do your research beforehand. There are so many resources out there on the internet that you can probably have a lot of your questions answered before you even get to someone. Everyone is really busy and they will help you, because that's just who we are as a profession. But if you do your own research in advance, it honestly is a better look on yourself, but also it's just nice to see that someone is actually interested and they're willing to put in that effort. Anyways, that was a whole other aside. This video was getting very long, but that's okay. Then I'm gonna move on to some of the board's questions. Okay, so first question, very good question. Did you feel prepared for your boards after graduating? I think prepared is a interesting word of choice. I will say that when I graduated my program, I felt competent as a genetic counselor. The boards is a whole other question. The way that the boards is that it really just tests your knowledge of things that you might never use in your life. And that's how it is for a lot of standardized testing. It's like a bunch of crap pretty much that you will never use in your life that you just need to memorize to write this test, and then you will never recall it. So for the most part, that's what I felt like with the boards. I was like, when in my life am I ever gonna need to know this when I can Google it? So not to hate on the boards by any means. I am very glad that I studied for the boards and that I passed this summer, because now that I am working, I was working the entire time, but I can remember things that I studied for during the boards that become important when I'm providing patient care. So I will say studying for the boards made me a better genetic counselor, for sure. It wasn't as an accurate representation, I think, of what I really need to know for my job, but that's okay. So I didn't feel like right out of school that I could write the board exam and pass, because I could not. But with enough resources, which is what genetic counseling school really does, make you a good, resourceful individual. And with those resources, with the study group that I had, with the motivation that we had to provide for ourselves, it worked out in the end. And another question I got was, how many hours do you study a week? And so I followed a schedule where my study group and I started studying pretty much right after we graduated. We maybe had a couple of weeks off. So like around June is when we started studying. And I would say that I worked full-time again the entire summer. And so I used to study 2 days after work in the weekdays, and then maybe like 2 to 3 hours a night, and then 1 full weekend. So maybe in total like 10 to 15 hours a week. It's very personal how much you study. Some people prefer to study really close to the exam and they retain more information that way. I personally need to study for things way in advance, and so for me that schedule worked, where I started in June and just like started reading the material, getting familiar with it, and then really got into it. Like I would say end of July is when I started doing practice tests and quizzing myself and really trying to memorize all of my different cue cards. So again, very personal decision, but that's just what worked for me. When you go through grad school, you realize you'll become more comfortable with what your study style is and what works best for you. And of course, that will be very important when you're studying for the boards. And then I would also recommend getting a study group. It was just really nice to have people who will hold you accountable, and then you hold them accountable, and you answer each other's questions, and then people in your study group are probably talking to other people in other study groups, and then it's kind of like a whole network. If you have a question and no one in your group knows, then you can ask other people. And so again, I don't know if I'm going to be writing the Canadian one again. I may, likely I will. Hopefully 1 year into my job, I'll have just a lot more knowledge than I did when I graduated. Just like more hands-on knowledge of things that you do, things that you explain. For me, like telling someone about something helps me retain it better than just reading it off a piece of paper. So that was my experience with the boards. And someone asked me, how much chocolate did you eat afterwards? I ate a lot of chocolate. It was a great feeling to be done with it. And also, I will say, if you are a student, a current student, or someone who recently graduated, it is very, very common to not pass on your first try. And that was something I was prepared for, because it was kind of like a whisper network where everyone just assumes that everyone else passes on the first try, but then when you start voicing your doubts, other people will be like, oh, you know what, I actually know like this many people from my class that didn't pass, or this coworker was like, listen, I didn't pass on the first time either. And then you're like, wow, it's actually quite common. You're not alone if you don't pass on the first try. And so that's just something to keep in mind. If you don't pass on the first try, it's not the end of the world. It sucks 100%, it would suck, but there is the possibility of doing it again, and you are not alone. Okay, I am exhausted. The introvert in me is ready to say goodbye. And so I'm going to be ending the video here. Please let me know if this was helpful for you, if you enjoyed this video. I have in the past and I will continue to vlog videos as well. And so you can see like a week in my life, things like that if you're interested in knowing what a genetic counselor really does and what their life looks like. And so if that seems of interest to you, please subscribe to this channel. I hope to see you next time and thanks for watching. Bye.